Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, we'll be talking about a subject that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's the American justice system. I am privileged to have the Honorable Judge Joe Charter with me today, and we're just going to explore that system a little bit and just take a closer look at it. Welcome to the show, Judge Charter.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you could make it here today. Been one of those days, of course, but I would like for us to first just take a look at a broad question: is the justice system just in America? And what I really mean by that is, does it look at people equally and fairly across the board?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the justice system, there's two parts. There's the civil system and the criminal justice system, and we're going to talk mostly about the criminal justice system. You know, when I talk to people about this, I think that justice is a process. So I've been a lawyer for 30 years, and I did a lot of trials. And, you know, we can all think of unjust results. You have the Innocence Project, where people have been in prison and the DNA evidence proves conclusively they didn't commit the crime. Or the HBO program, Making of a Murderer, you know, as to whether someone was sort of framed for that crime that he is still in prison for. But even though there are some unjust results, I think the process is a good one. We've evolved from, say, trial by combat in the Middle Ages. So the process has evolved. Doesn't mean that it can't evolve further and get better.
Okay. I have some slides that you provided for me, and I'd like to take a look at those as we progress through this conversation. So on slide 1, there's a couple of aspects of that criminal justice system criticism. So let's just look at those like one piece at a time. When we're talking about the first bullet point on there, disparate racial impact, can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think an example of this is what's evolved out of Ferguson, Missouri, with the officer-involved shooting of Michael Brown, the birth of Black Lives Matter. Then the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division report finding that 85 to 90% of stops in the Ferguson area were stops, arrests, and warrants were all for African Americans. So there is a disparate racial impact as far as law enforcement.
Okay, and slide number 2 that you were provided for me, is that kind of addressing this?
These are some images, certainly, of Black Lives Matter protests. You see the second bullet point on a criticism, militarization of the police. You know, this is not really community policing when we have our law enforcement peace officers looking like military SWAT teams, basically. The other issues around criminal justice criticisms, and we have to remember when we're talking about criticisms of a system, we're not necessarily criticizing the individuals involved in the system. There are many people, you know, involved in that system who are doing their best to make it work. District attorneys, police officers, criminal defense attorneys. But one of the problems we're facing systemically is mass incarceration. The U.S. has the highest incarceration rate per capita in the world. So we're ahead of Russia, ahead of China, which, you know, tend to be viewed as repressive regimes. But with 5% of the world's population, the U.S. has 25% of the world's prisoners. It's very costly. 2 million Americans in prison at a cost of $20,000 to $50,000 per year. The other thing we could talk about is criminalization of poverty, that court fines is a way we punish people, but that is having a disparate impact on people who are living at the poverty line, who just can't pay court fines on top of food and housing and medical costs.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think about what you just told me. First part is the mass incarceration piece. As I look at what's been happening and over the last maybe 20 years or so up to today, where we're going to the privatization of the prison system, is that a factor in this mass incarceration?
It is a factor. I think anytime you privatize anything, that you have to look at the economic incentives involved. So let's talk about, with the burden on state budgets for criminal justice and corrections, sometimes an appealing solution is to outsource it. Well, if you outsource, say, for example, probation services, which many states do, what are the incentives? If your corporation loses income when someone is successful in that system and completes their probation, you have a disincentive to have people be successful. And so that's what we have to watch out for with privatization. It's not really an issue of the left or the right. I mean, it's the social policy choices we make. Often you hear people say they want to be tough on crime. There is a group called Right on Crime, and they take a very conservative view to the criminal justice system, saying that it's costing too much. The government is too involved in these things, and really we ought to go to a more restorative justice sort of system that focuses on the victims. You look at a caption in a case, it's the state of Oregon versus defendant, instead of the defendant who committed the wrong versus the victim, and what are the rights and interests of the victim in the situation.
So that begs for the question, what is the purpose of our justice system?
Yeah, we have a slide in here as to the purposes of the criminal justice system. I think that would be slide number 10, taken from the Oregon statute. Public safety, deterrence. So punishment, you would hope would deter people from committing crimes. Corrections and rehabilitation. Rehabilitation really comes on the back end. Are we just sending people to prison to, is it like crime university where they learn how to be better criminals? Or do we try to treat their maladaptive behaviors, whether it be drug abuse or mental health issues, so they can come out of prison and be productive citizens? Really what we want these people is to serve their time, come out with the tools where they can become tax-paying citizens and law-abiding members of society.
There's a big question as to, with privatization, the question is who's benefiting from the work that's being done by people within the prison system. And you see a lot of videos and a lot of sound bites talking about huge corporations who are having their products made by prisoners, who are making 15, 35 cents an hour. We don't pay that on the outside. So there's a big question on how that system is working and whether anybody is going to be motivated to really rehabilitate, educate the people who have gone to prison rather than keep them in that position where they become a cheap labor source for the big corporations in the country. So that is really huge right now as far as conversations that are going on. And I'm going to go a little bit further, then I'll let you respond to me. You were talking about the system on the back end is about rehabilitation. And you also mentioned, which most of us know, that once you're in the system teaches you how to be better at what got you into the system in the first place. So it's not really preparing people for society, to be productive for society as a whole, unless we're looking at cheap labor sources, okay? And then when people get out, and this I know this is a lot, but I think we can get through this. When people get out of prison, they're not done. They can serve their time. The society, they're not done. They have questions on their job applications. This
Right.
says, have you ever been to prison? Yes. Okay, now I can't get a job. I can't get housing. I can't get public assistance because I haven't done anything for that time there, and I need something to help me start and get back up on my feet if I've been in that situation. So how do we really have a just system that looks at the victim, looks at society, and also looks at the perpetrator to teach them or make them a better productive part of the society that we're building here?
Yeah, I think when you look systemically, you have to look at the economics. And so you've touched on that. I think for a while there was a brand of jeans that was called prison jeans. And that was part of the marketing. You know, they're made in prison by prisoners. Well, the fact is, if you, as you stated, if their person doing the labor is being paid 35 cents an hour, I mean, how could manufacturers outside of that compete with that very low labor costs? What we have to recognize when we're talking about the social policies that go into the criminal justice system is, we're paying for this. So you've also mentioned collateral consequences. When you sentence a criminal to prison, the consequence is not just that he serves that time. There are all sorts of collateral consequences the sentencing judge never takes into account. You're going to lose your right to vote if you're a felon. You're going to lose your right to have a handgun. There are many professional licenses that you no longer qualify for. There was a judge on the East Coast who wrote a lengthy opinion about this, found 5,000 collateral consequences from a felony conviction. In Oregon, there are about 1,000 consequences, and 70% of those relate to employment issues. So again, if you come out and because of these collateral consequences, you can't get a job and support your family, what are you going to do? You're going to probably return to crime. As far as what we're paying for, 75% of the Jackson County budget is spent on public safety. So that's our police officers, that's our jail, and that's our corrections system. We could look at slide number 13 that shows that the pie for the correctional systems, the bigger slice of the pie is probation services. And that's supervising people who have come out of prison. As far as our Jackson County jail, only 5% of the inmates there are actually serving sentences. 55% of them are just awaiting trial. They've never been convicted of the crime they're in jail for. They're there pre-trial. So we have this clog both at the input and the output of the system. And that pre-trial clog, is shown on slide 12, where there's been a very large increase in the last 14 years of unconvicted persons. It's doubled in the last 27 years or so of people just waiting for trial. So there are all these pre-trial issues that need to be dealt with.
Okay, I have in our system, so help me understand how we have all these people in prison that haven't been to trial. They're incarcerated that haven't been to trial, and some haven't even been charged yet. When you have the right in this country to a speedy trial, what isn't that written? You have so much time to get to trial. So how is this happening where people are in there? And I know some cases where people have been in there for years and never been charged. So how does this happen?
How does it happen? Well, again, you have to look at county budgets. So the pretrial decisions that judges are making, you have to be able to fund that. The courts themselves, The judges make decisions, but they need support staff. So for example, again in Jackson County in 2012, the pretrial release office was eliminated, I assume due to budget cuts. And so then you would have forced release of prisoners, saying, you know, you have too many people in jail, you just have to release people sort of randomly. The office was reestablished in 2015, and so 2016, the last year we have numbers for, 39% of those who were reviewed as to, is this person a risk to the community? Are they a flight risk? Are they going to show up for trial? 39%, almost 40% of those reviewed were released. So that's an improvement to the system. Yes, there is a right to speedy trial, but we've talked about economics. The bail industry has a huge economic interest in the bail system. And they are fighting criminal justice pretrial reforms across the nation. So this is a very, very topical issue. It's happening now legislatively and with litigation across the country.
Okay, so there's still, as we try to make the system better, there are special interests that kind of want it to be the way it is because it profits them to keep this system where they have an economic advantage by having it that way. So I'm going to back up a little bit, back to one of the bullet points on slide 1, which is the criminalization of poverty. Let's look at that a little closer. We know that, and this was part of the real beginning question, is the justice system just across the board? So if I make $20,000 a year,
Right.
and something happens to me, I get a traffic ticket, I get a disorderly conduct for playing my music too loud, and I need to be in court at noon, and I have a job and a family to go to, and then I can't find that money because it's going to take away from the things that I'm doing to sustain my life and sustain my family and make us not thrive, but just survive in the situation that we're in. And then if I'm fairly wealthy, I'm making $175,000 a year, and I get a violation for a noise violation, and they charge me a couple $100, the same couple $100 they're charging the guy making $20,000. Isn't that disparity in the system?
The short answer is yes. I mean, so what I do, my day job is I'm a traffic court judge for the Jackson County Justice Court. I've given presentation to judges' education conferences on the Ferguson issues of people being in jail because they can't pay their fines. Might be helpful to look at an example we have on slide 8. And so the San Francisco civil rights attorneys had a report that came out in April of 2015 that says, you know, this is not just a problem in Ferguson, Missouri, that 43 states suspend driver's licenses for unpaid court fines, but only 4 of those states hold hearings to determine if the fine imposed is going to if there's an ability to pay that fine by the person involved. So, you know, we look at other systems. Finland has something called a day fine system, where if you're a millionaire, you can get a speeding ticket, and the officer on the scene with his handheld computer can check the tax return database and calculate that the fine is going to be, and this has actually happened, $125,000 for speeding today, because that's going to impact you in your circumstance as a millionaire, and that's going to deter you from speeding. The example on slide 8 is this is a fictional person, Alyssa. She simply did something that was not malicious. She forgot to change her address. It was issued as a $25 fix-it ticket, but then the DMV suspended her for failing to pay that fine. She was fired from her job as a bus driver because her license was suspended. Now she can't get a job without a license. She can't make money to pay on the fines without a job, and the fine amount increased to, like 10 times that much, 100 times that much, $2,900. And so there have been lawsuits across the country, class action lawsuits in Virginia, Tennessee, other places, where they're essentially saying that this policy of suspending driver's licenses without considering the impact on ability to pay are unconstitutional. So it's simply the revolving door we're creating if we don't say, tell me something, at sentencing, tell me something about your economic ability to pay this fine, and helping people have some responsibility by paying a fine they can afford, and just suspending their license. They will continue to drive on the suspended license, get more tickets for driving while suspended. Pretty soon when they have $2,000 to $3,000, it's a black hole that they can never climb out of. So we need to have things like community service as a different way to pay, to have that responsibility if folks don't have an ability to pay.
Okay, so it really sounds like it's a punitive system when it does that. When it takes your ability to provide or even pay what they're asking you to pay, it's attacking you instead of looking at, okay, this person is already working, they are productive. I'm going to take that away if I do this. So how do we get to the point where judges and the people that are making those decisions are considering that? I know at one point there was mandatory minimums, things like that, and I know they're mostly over violent things that happen, but as we push people into desperate situations, violence happens because they don't know any other way to do things. And that could be simply take part of that away just by giving those good people the opportunity to stay good people and keep doing what they're doing. That's just a consideration and something that I see could be happening.
Yeah, I would say, the idea of mandatory minimum sentences came out of this philosophy of tough on crimes. Well, we don't want judges to be light on criminals. We want them to be tough, and so we're going to enforce that by taking away their discretion and saying, for this type of offense, you can't consider the circumstances. You must sentence this person to jail, and it relates. It increases the costs to society. And I think what we need to do is be smart on crime. And again, Right on Crime is a conservative organization, but it's saying we can't afford what these mandatory minimums, these asset forfeitures, these other social policies that we have are forcing, which are being forced upon us by the government. So back to fine amounts. The initial idea, I suppose, was a fine amount is not the same as jail. It'll have some deterrent effect. But the reality is a lot of those fines aren't being collected. In Oregon, the state of Oregon has about $1 billion out in uncollected fine amounts. In my opinion, they're never going to collect those fine amounts. So there needs to be some way to resolve that. In California, the figure is closer to $10 billion. And, so they've just gone through a program of traffic amnesty where the idea was, we can reduce the fines if you come in for a certain period of time and make payments. And most importantly, we will reinstate your driver's license. And this is what we do at the Justice Court. If you're making payments to us, whatever it is that you can afford, we will unsuspend your license so you can get to work and you don't get more fines for driving while suspended. That's our way of trying to stop the revolving door.
Okay. I really want to get into the criminalization of poverty more, but I don't think we're going to have time right now. So maybe we could pick that up a little later. The justice reinvestment, you were alluding to that a little bit, how our justice system works. Can you take us through what that looks like?
Yeah, well, so again, this is another philosophy, and it starts in Oregon because some years ago, five years ago or so, the governor at that time looked around the state and said, you know, we can look at sociological data like reading levels in third grade and predict how many people are going to be in prison in the 10, 15 years down the road based on that. And based on those predictions, we need to build state prisons, not your local county jails, but state prisons all over the state. So let's start talking about where do we site them. The antidote to that was called justice reinvestment, where the state said to the county, for every person you don't send to a state prison, we will reinvest that money in programs that keep people out of prison, basically.
Okay.
Whether it's drug courts, treatment courts, mental health courts, whatever the policy is.
Okay, so we're running out of time now. We've got maybe a few seconds left, so we can pick this up at another show. I'm really grateful you came here. I'm getting a lot out of what we're talking about. I'm sure our audience is also. I'd like to thank everybody for watching. My name is Andy Draper. This is the Andy Draper Show. We have Judge Joe Charter with us today. I'd also like to thank all of the volunteers that helped to put this show together. Southern Oregon University for giving us this space and time to do that. And hopefully we'll see you on the next show. Good night.